listen to Todd Starnes because he speaks to the conservative values that I was raised on. He's not afraid to tackle the tough issues that we face today in our nation.
People my age grew up listening to Paul Harvey. We actually looked forward to it to find out what Paul Harvey was going to bring that day to the radio. And Todd kind of reminds me of that. Todd brings some normal perspectives to the conversation with a lot of humor and sincerity.
I appreciate the stand that Todd Starnes takes as a conservative Christian in America. He wants to give anyone who wants to live out their faith in Jesus Christ, he wants to give them a voice.
It's entertaining, it's news, but also it's truth, and that's what we want to know.
It's good to have a voice out there that reflects what we grew up on, our values, our morals, and just that good, solid American background that we want to teach our kids as well.
I believe we are one nation under God. I believe that every single one of our founding documents are flavored by Judeo-Christian values and precepts. And I believe that we have a responsibility as Christians to defend the Constitution, to defend those rights. And if we don't do it, who will? I hope when people hear my commentaries, when they read my books, I hope they are inspired. I hope they are challenged. I hope they are encouraged. But most of all, I hope people know, especially people of faith, that they've got a friend at the Fox News corner of the world.
My goodness. Thank you. My goodness, thank you so much. Well, what a blessing to be here. And Warren, thank you for that kind introduction. And it is an honor to be among brothers and sisters who want to walk worthy. And just flew in from New York City today. And I have to tell you, it's a little warm down here in Georgia, but it's warmer in New York City. It was 110 degrees yesterday in the Big Apple. And there's something, because a lot of people say, well, Starnes, you're from the South. You ought to be used to this heat and this humidity. And this is true, but in the South, even though it's hot and humid, we have air conditioning and we have the fragrance of magnolia. Up in New York City, when you've got 12 million people living bumper to bumper, it gets a little interesting, the aroma. I tell people if you're coming up to New York City this time of year to make sure to pack some Febreze with you when you come. Well, it is an honor to be here, and I'm a huge Trail Life USA fan, and I love sharing your stories with the rest of the nation, and I love sharing the great work that these young men and these young boys are doing across our country, and I want to talk about some of those things over the next few moments. It's a busy time at Fox News. Any of you folks watch Fox News by any chance? All right, we've got a few. If you watch MSNBC, some of the younger trailmen would like to have a moment of prayer with you in the, I'm just kidding, sort of. Oh, I forgot, we're live streaming, aren't we? All right, just kidding, Rachel Maddow, just kidding, so just kidding. Wow. So it's, I have to tell you about living in New York City. A lot of people ask me, Todd, what's it like? You're a Southerner, and this is true. I was born and raised in Memphis, Tennessee. I came to know Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior at a Baptist church. I walked that aisle as a young boy, and I was baptized in a pond in Byhalia, Mississippi, and it's right outside of Memphis, Tennessee. And if you know anything about that part of the country, in the summertime, we would have outdoor revival meetings, and they would have these great Southern gospel groups come, and you knew that the Southern Gospel Quartet was good. And can I just say something about Southern Gospel Quartets? They always have 5 people in them, and I never did understand that. Why don't they call them quintets? I never could understand that. But you always knew that the Southern Gospel group was good if that bass player, when they were singing Have a Little Talk with Jesus, and they hit those low notes and your banana pudding started to shimmy, you know, that was a good quartet. That was a good quartet. A little too much information, I know, but my mother asked the preacher to baptize me twice just to make sure all the sin got washed away. I was not a good child growing up. But living in New York City, it is interesting. There was a bit of a culture shock, and most of it had to do with language and understanding that Southerners we use 5 or 6 syllables for a 1-syllable word, and it's because we just like to savor the vowels. You folks in the South know what I'm talking about. But it has gotten better. Since the last time I met with you folks, we got our very first Chick-fil-A, the official chicken of the Lord. And they had to delay the opening. It took a long time to teach the people from the Bronx how to say "my pleasure." But once they figured that out, it was amazing because they opened up that restaurant directly across the street from Fox News Channel. It was like the glory of the Lord just shone down on 6th Avenue in New York City. So it really is, it was a wonderful thing to get Chick-fil-A up there. I live in Brooklyn, New York, and I was talking to Charlie, who was so kind, and Charlie picked me up at the airport there in Greenville and drove me out here to this beautiful retreat center. And he was asking, what's it like living in Brooklyn, New York? I do live among the indigenous liberal population. I am the only conservative in my neighborhood. My mailman says I'm the only member of the National Rifle Association in the neighborhood. So I'm Neighborhood Safety Patrol. But I love telling this story. We had a hurricane hit a few years back, and of course, being from the South, I know how to prepare for those. You just need a 6-pack of Abita Springs root beer and a pork butt that you can smoke and some duct tape. And that'll typically get you through the average storm. So I was going down to our local market, and we have a lot of people outside our market always asking for money. All the liberal advocacy groups are out there asking for money. Greenpeace and the Human Rights Campaign, and the PETA people are the worst, though. They're very aggressive, and I think it's because they don't eat meat. They're just in a bad mood. So anyway, I walk in there and get my provisions, and it's a madhouse. It's a free-for-all in the produce section because I live mostly among a vegetarian crowd, and so they're fighting over the arugula and the kumquats, and I walk over, get my pork butt, and get my duct tape and my root beer, and wearing my NRA ball cap. And I walk outside, and of course, nobody else wants to have anything to do with me because of the ball cap, except for that PETA lady, and she sticks that bony little meatless finger right in my face. And she says, "Sir, do you love animals?" And I looked at that lady, and I said, "Only if they're deep fried," and kept right on going. So, Mark, there is a point to this, and I'm going to get to it. But you have to, a lot of people ask me about my Uncle Jerry and Aunt Lynn from North Mississippi, and I write about them. They give me permission. If you have read my books, you know I have kind of a weird writing style. It's a little quirky, but I was really inspired as a writer growing up by Irma Bombeck and Louis Grizzard, who is a great Southern writer. And so I like to really flavor a lot of the stories I write with a lot of humor, because, I mean, there's some really crazy stuff happening in our world right now. And so we need to be able to share a little bit of a laugh. And I love to use my Uncle Jerry and Aunt Lynn. Real human beings, by the way. Many people ask me, are they real? And they are. My Uncle Jerry was talking to me the other day. He said, "Todd, we've got a big problem. Uncle Jerry retired. He was a school teacher, and now he sells guns at one of the local sporting goods stores in the Memphis area." I said, "What's the problem, Uncle Jerry?" He says, "Well, my buddy Earl Clodknocker and I, and I don't know if Earl Clodknocker is real or not, but I just humor Uncle Jerry." He says, "Well, we got sent to HR. He said, we've been violating rules. We got to go to these classes we've been violating cultural appropriation, and we're infested with privilege, and we got to get rid of the privilege." And he just went on and on and on. So Uncle Jerry has announced, because apparently at the sporting goods store they have all sorts of clubs for different diversities and ethnicities and genders, except for one, and it's the demographic that Uncle Jerry and Earl Clodknocker of the Mississippi Clodknockers are a part of. So Uncle Jerry said that he has become the founding member of a new group called HAWG, H-A-W-G, Heterosexual Anglo White Guys Club. Meanwhile, Aunt Lynn plays the organ at the United Methodist Church in Coldwater, Mississippi. She is the church organist, and she is also in charge of church security. Aunt Lynn has a carry concealed permit, and she's the only organist in the state of Mississippi that can play Amazing Grace and squeeze off a couple of rounds without missing a beat. So that's my Aunt Lynn. Well, a lot of people want to know, what is it like working at Fox News? And I have to tell you something, folks. It's a blessing. I mean, it really is a blessing. I never imagined that I would be at Fox News. I don't look that good in HD, so I kind of figured, I would be a writer most of my career, but I think the Lord has a sense of humor, and He saw fit to send me to New York City, where I have been almost 15 years now, telling our stories to the rest of the country. And that is something that I take quite seriously, and it's something that I love to do. One of my great passions is to come alongside fellow believers who find themselves at odds with the politically correct culture, and to be able to right wrongs. And over the years, we've been able to do that a time or two. And I consider that to be a great joy and a great privilege. I said this when I first met you many years ago, as you were beginning this noble adventure. I told you that I was one of those people who clings to his guns and clings to his religion. I'm one of those people that was called a deplorable, irredeemable. But I do believe that I am still proud to call myself a gun-toting, Bible-clinging, barbecue-eating son of a Baptist. And I'm not bitter, I'm blessed, and I'm not irredeemable, because I've been redeemed by the blood of the Lamb. Now, one of the things that I talk about on a regular basis is the idea of faith and freedom, and I believe they go hand in hand. And I believe that's one of the reasons why Trail Life is so important to the future of this nation. It was John Adams who once said these words: "Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other." And when you read that quote in today's context, and where we have been really over the past decade, it makes perfect sense why the country is in the shape it is in. Because there has been a great effort by the secularist and by the leftist to eradicate God from the culture, to marginalize people of faith from the public marketplace. And what was it that John Adams said? Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. Well, what happens when you take morality and you take religion out of that equation? It does not work. I have a new book coming out in September 10th to be exact. It's called Culture Jihad: How to Stop the Left from Killing a Nation. It's a subtle title, don't you think? A little subtle. But over the past year, I've been researching and investigating what's been happening in this country. The attacks on who we are as a people, the attacks on the Constitution. Just the other day, I reported that they're considering tearing down a statue or a mural of George Washington at George Washington High School in San Francisco. They say that mural now offends students and it has to be torn down. So now they're banning murals, they're banning paintings, they're tearing down statues. They're banning books, not just Huckleberry Finn, but Little House on the Prairie. They're banning To Kill a Mockingbird. And the list goes on and on and on. Now it is deemed offensive if you pledge allegiance to the flag or if you stand for the national anthem. Just recently, the U.S. women's soccer team celebrated an incredible World Cup victory, but many people it was hard to celebrate because some on that team, they cursed America, they cursed the president, they refused to stand for the national anthem. This is not a moment for name calling, but I will say this. One of the individuals not on that team was a born-again believer who refused to pledge allegiance to another flag. Where is the tolerance? So this is what's happening in our country. This is what's happening in our culture. And I warn people in my new book that we cannot afford to become complacent because the culture war rages on. Just this morning, my column on foxnews.com, it tells the story of what's happening in Greenville, South Carolina, where a federal judge just a few days ago declared that prayer is no longer allowed at high school graduations, and that if faculty members are reviewing a student's speech, they must take out references to prayer. And they also told the county that they would no longer be allowed to sing any sacred hymns at their high school graduation. This is not happening during the Obama administration. This is happening in the Trump administration. You see, this is not a political issue. This is a cultural issue. The Constitution is under assault. A recent Gallup poll shows that a frightening number of young Americans are favoring socialism over capitalism. And we know the stories about the sex and gender revolutionaries. They are on the warpath, and they have already conquered many public schools across this country. Vice President Mike Pence, just about a month or so ago, delivered this warning to Christians as he spoke at Liberty University, and I want to read what he said. The truth is, we live in a time when the freedom of religion is under assault. We live in a time when it's become acceptable, even fashionable, to ridicule and even discriminate against people of faith. The Vice President concluded this passage of his speech with these remarks: throughout most of American history, it's been pretty easy to call yourself a Christian. It did not even occur to people that you might be shunned or ridiculed for defending the teachings of the Bible. Some of the loudest voices for tolerance today have little tolerance for traditional Christian beliefs. And you see, over the decades, we have witnessed many of our long-cherished American traditions fall by the wayside. And yet, Trail Life USA rose up. They stood tall. They stood in the gap, and they are standing in the gap. And that's one of the reasons why I am so committed to supporting this great organization. Trail Life USA, American Heritage Girls, I want you folks to know that we're going to cover those stories at the Fox News corner of the world. You know, I was binge watching over the holidays the incredible series John Adams. I'm a big history nut. I don't know if you guys are like me, but I love watching history. And I was struck by something in that series. We've been told, even among conservatives and even among many evangelicals, that America is not a Christian nation. Well, I disagree with that. I go back to what John Adams said, and I believe when you read the early writings of our founding fathers, I believe that our country is in fact a Christian nation. We've gone astray, but we're a Christian nation. You know, you look at the the founding fathers, I don't know if you guys do this. I'm bad about doing this. I can't just watch a movie. I'm always Googling something about the movie, especially if I'm a huge biography guy, so I'm always Googling to find out, oh, is this true, or what really happened here? And I was surprised to learn that most of our founding fathers, the men and the women, like Betsy Ross, were well under the age of 40 years old. Most of our founding fathers, Alexander Hamilton, 21 years old. I mean, he wasn't rapping back then, but like they do on Broadway now, but he was 21 years old. James Monroe, 18 years old. What does that tell you? It tells you those young men made a difference. Those young men fought and got us a country. And imagine what generation after generation after generation of young men and women can do in this great land. That's the task that faces Trail Life USA. But look, these attacks, they're nothing new. William F. Buckley Jr., who is really considered one of the founding fathers of conservatism, he wrote a book many years ago. I would encourage you, moms and dads, I would encourage you to read this book, God and Man at Yale. And he realized early on that this great institution of higher learning that was meant to educate and train up the next generation of preachers in America was actually secularizing students as they were coming through those hallways and those doors. Back in the 1950s and 60s, we could see the warning signs. We could see the attack on the culture. But I still have hope. And even as crazy it is out there, and it can get crazy out there, and I know it, it's going to be okay. Because you see, our hope is not built on a political slogan. Our hope is built on Jesus Christ. That's where our hope is built. A couple of weeks ago, I was speaking to some young people at the Reagan Ranch out in Santa Barbara, California, Young America's Foundation. There's a beautiful overlook where Ronald Reagan used to go, and he would pray. And it was a beautiful vista. It reminded me, I don't know why, it reminded me of the imagery on the ranch, Hidden Valley Ranch salad dressing bar. You know what I'm talking about? Everything's always about food with me, so you guys have to humor me here. It reminded me of that. It was just beautiful, just beautiful. There's a marker there. They call that the Psalm 121 overlook. President Reagan used to reference that prayer. I look to the hills, from whence cometh my strength. My help cometh from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. You see, when the going gets tough, we have to keep our eyes focused on the Almighty. That's the lesson here. I write a lot in the book about, as a matter of fact, I have some trail life stories in the new book, and talking about some of the great things that are happening out of this organization. But when you look at where we are going, you have to look at the young people. We've got to raise up the next generation. And there's no doubt about it, they're under attack, folks. The things that they have to endure in their public school campuses are things that we probably could not imagine back when we were growing up and going through school. And many of them are faced with attacks on their faith and their belief system every single day. So what is our job? What is our responsibility? Well, you guys already know because you're here. We have to support organizations like Trail Life. We have to support organizations that are going to stand in the gap and raise up that next generation of young Americans. We have to. I want to read a story to you, if that's okay. This is from my book. And so my publisher, I hope he's not watching, but I want to share with you because I think it really says a lot about the character of this country and the importance it is for community to stand alongside these young men. This is, I'm just going to read the chapter and you guys can listen here. In the opening chapter of this book, I told you that I still have hope for America. In spite of the overwhelming onslaught against our faith and our freedom, I am hopeful. There are still moms and dads who have committed to raising up a generation of young Americans who have pledged allegiance to our way of life. They are the freedom generation. And I love telling their stories on my radio program and in my newspaper column. One of my favorite stories came by way of a reader from the Mississippi Gulf Coast. There are good people in that part of the country. One of the stories involved Navy veteran Jerry Pino, who died on December 12, 2016 in Long Beach, Mississippi. He was 70 years old. We don't know much about Jerry. He was born in Baton Rouge, joined the Navy in New Orleans. He was a petty officer, 3rd class in Vietnam. That's the extent of his biography. No family, no friends. He died alone. Jerry's body lay unclaimed for several weeks at the Ryman family funeral home. No one stepped forward. Funeral home worker Kathy Warden told me. He just didn't have any kinfolk. Miss Kathy explained the situation to her colleague, Eva Boomer, and they together decided something must be done to give this veteran a proper send-off. Something had to be done with respect, Miss Kathy said. We had to give him what he deserved. Nobody should go alone. Miss Eva, who is also a veteran, wondered if some of the boys at the Long Beach High School might be willing to serve as pallbearers. It was a long shot, though, seeing how most of the students were out on Christmas break. But Miss Kathy called her teenage son, Bryce, who in turn texted some of his friends, and within a matter of minutes, 6 young men volunteered to serve at a stranger's funeral. It was the right thing to do, 17-year-old Bailey Griffin told me. He served our country. He fought for our rights. For him to be buried with nobody there was just sad. I told myself I was going to do it, and I did it. They buried Petty Officer 3rd Class Jerry Pino on a Tuesday. The sun was shining, and there was a cool Gulf breeze meandering through the Biloxi National Cemetery. An honor guard stood at attention. The boys were smartly dressed in khaki pants and button-down shirts and neckties. They solemnly took their places on either side of the flag-draped coffin and escorted a man they did not know to his final resting place. Miss Kathy said that she went there for the service and she cried the whole way through. He had no one there. This veteran had nobody there but these boys. But what happened at the end of the funeral was incredibly moving and poignant. The flag that had draped Jerry's coffin was folded, and it was presented to the 6 young men from Long Beach High School, home of the Bearcats. It touched my heart, Miss Kathy said. The Sun-Herald newspaper shared a message from the mother of one of the pallbearers. Proud mom, when he told me that no one should be buried without people who care, especially a veteran. It's evidence that moms and dads are doing something right in Long Beach. That's what Miss Kathy said. Our community is teaching these boys from the heart how it should be, how to care, she said. They're still trying to figure out what to do with the flag that draped Jerry's coffin. It's been encased in glass along with the plaque that bears his name. There's talk about putting the flag on display at the high school or maybe inside the locker room where 4 of the pallbearers play football. It would be a fitting tribute to a man who died alone, but who was buried surrounded by his fellow countrymen. And oh, what a lesson for the rest of us. Demonstrated by a group of boys from Mississippi who committed in their hearts that nobody should go alone, especially a veteran. This is what it means to raise up that next generation. This is what it means to teach these young men to walk worthy. This is what it means to our country. Because sadly, there are many communities across this country where young boys do not have that sense of community. Young boys do not have those father figures. We have a job to do, and I do believe that in the long run, we're going to be able to save this country. And I believe that we are going to be able to restore those traditional American values to our nation. But first, we have to start in our homes. I want to share one last story with you. Dietrich Bonhoeffer said, "Silence in the face of evil is evil itself. God will not hold us guiltless. Not to speak is to speak, not to act is to act." You know, there are many Christians across America who have chosen to be silent for whatever reason. But I believe that God has called us to speak out. We are to be warriors, yes, but I contend we are to be happy warriors because we have hope. We must confront evil. We must confront those who would try to silence us, but we must do so in a winsome way. But we have to do so together with one voice. And if we can do that, we will facilitate change in this country. In closing, I've shared this story before, but it is one of my favorite stories to share. Mel Gibson starred in a film called We Were Soldiers, and it tells the story of the Battle of the Lodring Valley. Lieutenant Colonel Halmore and his men were surrounded, and everything appeared to be hopeless. The enemy was advancing with great force. Joe Galloway was there, a reporter for United Press International. And in the middle of all the chaos and in the carnage, he dropped to the ground when the bullets started flying. Well, as the movie tells us, there was a man there by the name of Sergeant Major Basil Plumley, and he stood resolute. And he walked over and he saw the quivering reporter in the dirt, and he gave him a swift kick with his boot. And he told the journalist, "You can't take no pictures from down there." It's true. And then he gave that old American journalist from UPI, he tossed him a weapon so he could defend his life. That reporter said, "No, sir, no, sir." He rejected the weapon. He said, "I'm a non-combatant." And that old crusty sergeant major looked down at that journalist and said, "Son, there ain't no such thing today." Well, as the story goes, that reporter picked himself up out of the dirt, picked up that rifle, stood alongside his fellow countrymen on that day, and the Americans, facing insurmountable odds, won the day. So I leave you with these words. My fellow brothers and sisters, we are surrounded. The cultural bullets are flying, and the enemies of freedom are advancing. And the time has come for all of us to stand resolute. You say, "Todd, but I'm not a fighter." Well, there's no such thing today, because we are freedom's last line of defense. I believe that Trail Life USA is freedom's last line of defense. So I say this: do not hide liberty's light under a bushel. Hold it high. Let the flame of freedom burn bright for all the world to see. And I believe it's time for every gun-toting, Bible-clinging, deplorable American to take a thunderous stand for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And may our prayer be on this day that our great nation will once again be that shining city on a hill. God bless you all very much.